Well, according to a best-selling new book, Trump has ample reason to worry. The book is called Collusion: Secret Meetings, Dirty Money, and How Russia Helped Donald Trump Win. I'm joined now by the book's author, Luke Harding, a veteran journalist for The Guardian and the paper's former Moscow correspondent.
I think actually you have to go back a long way to see when it began to Donald Trump's first trip to Soviet Moscow in 1987. Well, I think you just have to kind of look at what happened. We had Donald Trump's trip back in the kind of late Cold War period, and I talked to a whole number of sources for this book, some in Moscow, some in London, some in Washington, some defectors. I met with Chris Steele. I think what you have to understand is the fact that the sort of Soviet state and its Russian successor is very keen on kind of cultivating people, particularly Americans. The kind of person they were looking for during this period was someone who was vain, narcissistic, interested in money, perhaps unfaithful in their marriage. The daughters of the Soviet ambassador at the time, who went up to Trump Tower, flattered Trump and said, "You've built the most wonderful building in America." We have the famous trip by Trump to Moscow in 2013 for the Miss Universe beauty pageant.
But where then is the proof of a transactional relationship?
Well, I mean, that secret meetings, as the book says, we have Donald Trump Jr. meeting with a Russian lawyer. I mean, I think what you have to understand about Russian espionage is it's not Vladimir Putin sitting in a cave, flicking a red switch, and things happening across the continental United States. It doesn't work like that. And meanwhile, we have George Papadopoulos, foreign policy aide to Donald Trump, meeting a mysterious professor who features in Mueller's indictment with contacts to Moscow, who tells Papadopoulos.
Well, hold on a second, Luke. Hold on a second. He tells Papadopoulos that he has contacts to Moscow, but so far there's been no even proof of that.
Well, it's in the indictment. I mean, either you kind of live in the empirical world or you don't. But you know, a lot of very good journalists, both in the US and elsewhere, have obviously tried to get in touch with Mr. Mifsud to kind of try and talk to him, and we haven't had kind of much luck. But I mean, I think you have to kind of understand the context, which is that this is not a new movie; it's a kind of old movie. There's been quite a lot of kind of Russian intelligence activity over the years. The murder in 2006 of a Russian dissident. I wrote a book about this. There's a sort of volume of evidence, forensic, scientific, intelligence, to support this.
Support what?
To support the fact that essentially the level of espionage from Russia at the moment is comparable to the Cold War level. And I think that Russia played a role in last year's election is a matter of fact. I mean, it's certainly what US intelligence agencies believe, and practically everybody recognizes. Well, I mean, you don't take anything on faith. I mean, obviously you seek to verify and to be evidential and to kind of to follow leads wherever they go. But I think people who are sort of skeptical about the whole kind of Russia thesis don't kind of quite appreciate the nature of Vladimir Putin's state. I mean, I lived there for 4 years. I was eventually kind of kicked out for writing stories about kleptocracy, about Putin's fortune. You know, some of my friends in Moscow who are journalists have been murdered. You know, I'm a journalist and I'm a storyteller. I'm not a kind of head of the CIA or the NSA. But what I can tell you is that there have been similar operations in France, most recently when President Macron was elected.
After that election, the French Cyber Intelligence Agency came out and said it could have been virtually anybody.
Yeah, if you let me finish, there have been attacks on the German parliament.
Do you concede that the Russian hacking of the French election that you just claimed actually is not true?
Well, I mean that it's not true. I mean the French report was inconclusive, but you have to look at this kind of contextually. We've seen other attacks on European states as well from Russia.
Where else?
Well, Estonia, have you heard of Estonia? It's a state in the Baltics which was crippled by a massive cyber attack in 2008, which certainly all kind of Western European and former Eastern European states think was carried out by Moscow. I mean, I was in Moscow at the time. This is a kind of ongoing thing.
There's plenty of articles since then that have acknowledged this, that there was no Russian hacking of Germany.
I mean, I'm afraid that there was hacking of the Bundestag, the German parliament, in 2015. I mean, I spent 4 years as a correspondent in Berlin. Maybe you might just go to Moscow for a couple of weeks, talk to human rights people, and just talk to people, ask them about Kremlin hacking. Sorry, what do you think? What do you think Russian spy agencies do? You think they sit around having cups of tea? Or that they cultivated Trump, I've got no doubt about. And by the way, I've talked to a lot of people about Steele. I mean, he is, you may not like it, but he's actually regarded in London and Washington as being pretty kind of credible. Did you read my book, by the way? I mean, I think, you know, if you'd read my book, which unfortunately you didn't before you decided to do the interview, you would have seen that there's a whole history of the FSB and its kind of KGB predecessor doing these kind of entrapment operations. And really anyone who knows Russia or has bothered to read books on the Cold War sort of realizes this is precisely what they do. Now, did they do it with Donald Trump? We don't know. Steele thinks they did. Donald Trump is incredibly nice about Mr. Putin when he's very rude about a whole host of other leaders.
You write, the thing which gave me pause was Klimnik's use of smiley faces.
No, I mean, really what you're doing is now rather a sort of silly exercise. You haven't read the book, but you're taking one small bit and jumping on that.
Because you're using emoticons as proof of a Russian tie, so I'm asking you about it.
If you let me...
Okay, please, yeah.
Your kind of question, and maybe you could read the rest of the book when you finish the interview. But, I mean, this is, you know, Kalimnik is the guy that Paul Manafort last summer emailed about trying to set up a kind of private briefing. I emailed him, we're in kind of correspondence. He's still in contact, by the way, with Paul Manafort. Manafort I met, I mean, there's a whole chapter about what he was doing in Ukraine, about his work for Viktor Yanukovych. He's now been indicted with money laundering, with conspiracy against the US by Robert Mueller. So I think it's perfectly legitimate to look at him. And
I'm not saying, Luke, I'm not saying it's not legitimate. I'm taking issue with you writing, the thing which gave me pause was Klimnik's use of smiley faces, as if the use of smiley faces is somehow evidence of a nefarious Russian government tie.
In 2010, Yanukovych became president. And then when he did that, the first thing he did was to jail the main opposition leader, so that Manafort made about $75 million, allegedly, from his kind of activities in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, and in Moscow. And you have to look at the kind of constellation of people around Donald Trump, and very many of them, not all of them, but very many of them had a kind of Russian connection with him. I mean, you can be benign and say it's a curious coincidence, but I think it's more than that.
Can we agree then that there is no proof of collusion? There even is no proof of hacking. And if I have it right from you, the main reason to question, to think that there is a tie between Trump and Russia is A, the financial connections between people in his circle and Russians possibly, and also the fact that Russia has a history, as we've heard you outline, of cultivating foreigners.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree. I mean, this is your view that there's no collusion and there's no proof of hacking. I mean, this is what you assert. But I mean, firstly, I don't accept that. I don't think that's the case. What happened last year happens in a kind of wider context of Soviet and Russian espionage. You know, we haven't really talked very much about Vladimir Putin, about the kind of person he is. I mean, he's a former KGB agent, and there's no doubt that he disliked Obama, that he loathed Hillary Clinton, and that he was very, very keen for Donald Trump to win. I mean, you just have to look at Russia. I mean, I speak Russian. There were kind of clear preferences, but also there's this history of espionage.
But I think we're conflating that with evidence and a conclusion that meant that he cultivated Trump and intervened in the election. I think those two things are different.
That's your view, and it would be great if you could go to Moscow, go to Kiev, go to the post-Soviet world, talk to people from the Russian opposition, talk to human rights activists, talk to journalists whose colleagues have been murdered, and perhaps understand a little bit better the kind of state that Vladimir Putin's Russia is. I think you'd be doing yourself a service, and you'd be doing your listeners a service.
I don't think I've countered anything you said about the state of Vladimir Putin's Russia. The issue under discussion today has been whether there was collusion, the topic of your book.
Yeah, I know, but you're clearly a kind of collusion rejectionist. I'm not kind of sure what evidence, short of Trump and Putin in the sauna together, would convince you. Clearly nothing would convince you.
But again, but again, well, look, this gets back to the issue. The question is whether there is any evidence so far, and I don't see it. And it looks like Luke has logged off.